Bye.
All right. Yeah, we can go ahead and get started. Just to let folks know, we are going to be recording this. So, Hamid, if you don't mind, you feel free to start the recording then.
I just did.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, welcome everybody to our War on Youth meeting, where we're building our fight against the various wars on youth, which hopefully we're all a part of those fights in our own lives. And in our circles. And so before we go into what we're going to do for today, I just wanted to first share a couple of logistical things. So again, this is being recorded, and it will be on our website, the recording of it, as all our webinars have been. And then yes, if you haven't gotten a chance, if you could go ahead and in the chat and put your name, your gender pronoun, and your city, if you have any organizational affiliation. If you're not with an org, that's all good too. And so just for some other logistical pieces, we do have people on mute. So you're not able to unmute yourself, remove yourself from mute. This is not because we want to control or police folks. It's because we've been Zoom bombed and have had people say really terrible things. And so it's just for that purposes. But if you do have a comment or any question, you're welcome to let us know. We can unmute you. That's not a problem at all. And this is going to be an interactive meeting. And so, and also the chat is open. You're able to put your comments or questions in the chat. Again, if we do see any Zoom bombing happening in the chat, we'll have to then close the chat, but hopefully that won't happen. And so feel free to put any comments or questions on there. Am I missing anything logistically speaking? I think that's pretty much it, right? Okay, great. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Nadia. I'm a teacher. I'm also with the Stop LA Crime Coalition. And today we're going to be, we're really excited. We have folks from the UK joining us. It's the middle of the night for them. So yeah, we were just like really, it's just really great to have y'all here, Cage. So we're going to be talking with them, as well as the Palestinian Youth Movement, PYM, who's been a core partners with us in this fight on the war on youth. And then we'll be talking a little bit about the gang narrative and gang policing as well. And so just before we go and talk to Cage and hear from you all, I just wanted to, for me, just maybe 2-3 minutes, give a very brief background on what we mean when we say the war on youth fight. So basically, it's looking at how the state, the government, is targeting youth, particularly Black and Brown and Muslim, Indigenous, trans, queer youth, and how through different programs they are being targeted and criminalized as threats to national security. And really in the name of fighting violent extremism. And so what we've been seeing is this coming together of targeting young people, not only as gang members, but also as potential violent extremists or terrorists. And Celine and Ruby will be going a little bit more into the programs, but just really briefly, one of them is called Countering Violent Extremism, which is shortened as CVE. And this is a program that was started by the Department of Homeland Security to essentially target and criminalize people who speak, and these are the behaviors they say that are deemed suspicious, right? So speaking against foreign policy, going to the mosque frequently, other really ridiculous racist indicators. And so what they say is that people are on a pathway to radicalization, which for us, we're proud to say we're on that pathway and we're not going to stop off that pathway, right? But of course, to the state, that is deemed as dangerous. And so CVE, what makes it particularly dangerous is it is done under the guise of not being as quote unquote police or law enforcement heavy. And so that is one way it has been able to infiltrate our communities. What part of CVE, there's FBI guidelines called Preventing Violent Extremism in Schools, and those particularly target K through 12. So behaviors the FBI has deemed as suspicious and an indicator that a young person might be a extremist are things such as being too much into your culture, expressing anger or frustration, being in poverty, being a migrant, feeling isolated. So, I mean, really, things that are very core to what it means to be an adolescent and to be young. And so this is another program that's part of that. And then there's also the Black identity extremism designation, which was leaked. It was an FBI report that was leaked. They claim to no longer be using the designation, but yet Black youth, particularly Black youth who are targeting police violence, continue and have historically been criminalized. And then the gang narrative piece we'll be going into a little bit later, but that really looks at how both frameworks are coming together and being used to now target young people in that way. And so feel free if anybody, that was a really quick summary. We will be going into some more detail, but feel free if you have any questions or comments about what I said, feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat. And so if we can just jump right in, and Shasana, Asfar, if first would be great if you all would like to introduce yourselves and anything you'd like to share about CAGE. And thank you so much again for joining us all the way from the UK in the middle of the night. Very much appreciated.
You're welcome. Okay, I'll kick start. So yeah, my name's Shazana. I'm the outreach coordinator at CAGE, and it's really wonderful to be here with you all, although it's 2 a.m. and a part of the conversation. So thank you, Nadia, Akil, Nadine, Hamid, for giving us this opportunity, for giving CAGE this opportunity to be part of the conversation. So I'll start off with a bit about myself. I've been with CAGE from the onset, very much involved in the grassroots activism, campaign work, and community building. As an organisation, CAGE started in 2003, initially as CAGE prisoners, campaigning for prisoners in Guantanamo. So calling for the rule of law to be upheld and for due process. And of course, we know that's a struggle that's still ongoing. And as an organisation at that time, without a doubt, it acted with courage at a time of heightened fear. It was a really difficult conversation to have, but CAGE kind of took that on. And that really set a benchmark, I think. And then as the war on terror has expanded into this sort of sprawling matrix of, surveillance, infiltration, structural Islamophobia, we've had to expand our remit and areas of work. And so you'll see that our campaign areas are very comprehensive. They spread across several areas, including close Guantanamo, Schedule 7, which is stop and search powers at airports and border ports, and prevent, which we're going to be talking about today. And as Nadia mentioned, is known as CVE in the USA. So just to add to that, we have three main areas of work. So we have research, casework, and community. And all three areas have actually played a very key role in allowing us to amplify the voices that are often shut down, that are often silenced, by giving us that sort of primary access to the lived experience of survivors and those that are targeted. And I think conversations like this are really important, but more than important, they're necessary for two reasons. The first, because by talking about and recognizing what harms our youth, what harms the spaces we occupy, we're able to understand the struggle. And the second reason is the continuation of this dialogue. It actually becomes a core component of building a movement against the structural violence. So just to draw on prevent, in 2015, the prevent duty was actually, it became a statutory obligation. So that means it placed a legal responsibility on schools, on nurseries, on universities, healthcare, social work sector, to have a due regard to the need to sort of prevent people from being drawn into terrorism. And that was based, similarly, as Nadia mentioned, on radicalization risk factors that were identified in in the science that underpins this strategy. And if anybody wants to, we can share the reports and papers that we've issued on this to be circulated through Nadia. You know, we can do that afterwards. So from the very beginning, you know, as an organization, we identified that this is going to have a damning effect on the community, on society, on the youth and families, and even wider than that, on other communities, although Muslims have been the primary targets of this policy. And the use of the factors from the study have actually led in practice to what you see as a pre-crime space, which places Muslim citizens under microscopic surveillance, which then leads to this sort of, you know, securitization of day-to-day activity and lives of Muslim citizens. So to break that down, what that looks like in the UK is over 500,000 people have been trained under the prevent duty. And that means sort of teachers trained to spot signs of radicalization in students, from toddler groups all the way up to sort of higher institutions like universities. It's led to a climate where trust is broken down in a space where that should be, you know, that should not be securitized, but rather the opposite of that. So when I think of schools, I think schools are sanctuaries, you know, they're places of nurturing and places of cultivation. And above all, I think there should be safe spaces, you know, for young people. And what Prevent does is in that setup, it strips away the ethical component of the teacher. So it intrudes into this space and it sees the student as suspect. So just to give you an actual case study and an example of how that manifests, and this is an actual case, you know, that we dealt with, where a child drew a picture of his father cutting a cucumber. And the teacher asked him, you know, what is this that you've drawn? And he said, it's a cucumber. And she misheard that and heard cooker bomb, which then led to a referral of that child. Now you can imagine the kind of impact that it had on that child, not just in that moment, but in years to come, you know, in terms of that child's relationship with the education system, with the state, the family's relationship, the community's relationship, you know. So I think when we think about impact, it's not something that's just in that moment. It actually transcends beyond that, and that is impact. That is the impact of this. So Prevent in the UK, you know, and it's wonderful that we're having this conversation because it was a precursor. You know, it's a lead policy that the US looks up to and looks up to, and I would say it's the blueprint that is being used and being exported globally as CVE. So although it was embedded in statute in 2015 in the UK, you know, as a policy, sort of stems way back to post 9/11, and I think we have to look at the way in which this operates, especially within the education framework and schools. It's really comes down to the state harming children in the very institutions that should cultivate healthy, progressive environments for the next generation. And so I think it's important to understand the different layers in which this structural violence is entrenched in order to build and fight back for that next generation. And this is where in the UK, you know, at Cage, we've been uncompromising in our position very much from the get-go. And, you know, today you have got a wider conversation where teachers, unions, medics, social workers, academics, they support the call to end Prevent. And, you know, and it's an ongoing struggle. And we recognize that it is seeped into every fabric and every layer of society. And so the resistance, the fight back has to be multi-layered, you know, to include community education, empowerment, to include the various spaces and the institutions that have been coerced into it, to include the various layers, basically. And, you know, we've had many conversations with practitioners and professionals where they too understand and they recognize the need to fight back. And so, you know, I go back to my earlier point about the necessity of conversations and dialogue sort of being a core component in mobilizing our efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Asfar, would you like to introduce yourself as well? And I do have a couple questions, but it would be great however you'd like to also introduce yourself, Asfar, and Cage.
Okay, you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so my name is Asfar. I also work at Cage. My role is sort of twofold. I focus on the research there, so I produce reports, and also the sort of student engagement component of our work as well. I'm with Susanna. Should I go into the speech or should I wait for anything else?
Whatever you prefer. Yeah, I will be asking a few questions, so whatever you prefer, if anything you'd like to say.
Okay, I mean, I've looked at sections about should I go into now or do I ask questions first? Should be up to you.
Sure, yeah.
All right,
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Thanks for inviting me. So thanks to Sophie for deciding and PYM for the invite. Yes, I asked for a few disclaimers before I start. So one, I speak with a very thick Northwest London accent. I don't say my T's, I don't say my L's. I speak quite fast, so apologies in advance. And two, I will be reading off a script because I can't freestyle for the life of me. Yeah, from looking sideways for laptop there. Yes, I want to zoom out a little bit from where Sean left off. I want to talk about the context of universities in the UK and how prevent fits into a wider political project there, especially in terms of A, like locking in major reforms to the education sector there in Britain, and of B, shutting down democracy in the space of organising within universities more broadly. So understand what's happening in British higher education, so universities, talking about HE for short, we need to go back to, I guess, the period, especially between 2009 and 2011. So that period began with obviously end of 2008, begin 2009, was like a wave of solidarity actions by students with Palestinians in Gaza following the car side there by Israel. And that action, that wave of solidarity sort of re-politicized and re-energized the student movement that had fallen into passivity following the defeat of the anti-war movement earlier in the decade. So it was like these networks of students, networks of activists, and networks of solidarity groups that were reactivated in 2010, the next year, in the mass protests by students and academic workers in response to sweeping new changes being introduced to HE by the new right-wing government, the Conservative-led government at the time. So ultimately, the protests failed, and the sort of reforms did go ahead for the legislation passed there. And in 2011, the year after, so the counter-terror policy prevent, as Shana mentioned, was introduced to universities for the first time. At that point, it was a voluntary policy, was encouraged but not mandated. And in 2015, as Shana mentioned again, it was made obligatory under law, what's called the Counterterrorism and Security Act 2015. With that, educators, including frontline lecturers, mental health counsellors, sort of other practitioners, sometimes like cleaning staff, security staff, and so on, were trained up to radical, quote unquote, and university policies across the world were rewritten to account for the again, in their words, the risk of people being drawn into terrorism with language they use. And these sort of instance policies to spot people who may be causing harm down the line. So often remembered is the sort of recollection of that period is sort of the headline reform, right? The reform in 2010 that often is most people remember is the fact that it tripled tuition fees from £3,000 a year to £5,000 a year. But really what that sort of 2010 law and that sort of period that the reforms represented was a sea change in how universities function, including one, the withdrawal of public or central government funding in favor of individual payment and loans, and two, a broader transformation of university education into a commodity. So in the years since 2011, there have been these two twin processes within the HE sector, within universities and education. So one has been the move towards marketization under HE reforms, and on the flip side, there has been securitization of universities and the sort of stifling of dissent from students and academics alike, which is best represented by Parent. So that's why I feel Parent fits into the wider project happening there. Again, what the introduction of Parent has served to do then is to undercut this sort of what was at the time sort of burgeoning repoliticization of students and young people realizing that things are not going all right. There's a massive sort of historical changes happening affecting their lives, and respond to that not justifiably with action. So importantly, Prevent is not just our policy, but it's part of a structural process both in higher education and also in wider society. So obviously Prevent exists outside of the university, I'm not talking about that now, just focus on it because my area expertise, or focus at least to the other end. What Prevent looks like in practice is that student groups, especially the Islamic societies, which are equivalent of MSAs, as what I call ISOCs, and sort of and other student groups campaigning against war, against tuition fees, against for Palestine, Palestinian cause, have often themselves muzzled and under surveillance by the institutions, by the universities. In schools, we've seen, for example, computer monitoring software being introduced, which can identify and flag up particular risky keywords that are typed on computers. So you type out a certain word by a child types a word, it's flagged up and sort of analyzed by someone in the IT department and potentially sent off to be a referral to Prevent. We've seen email systems in universities being monitored for the purpose of Prevent as well. And we have more concrete examples like the Muslim college student who was hounded by French officers and by his college for his Palestine activism. So police officers at the time told him that by wearing a Free Palestine badge, he was expressing extremist views, in their words. And when he was organizing a charity fundraiser for Palestinians, for a charity, he was questioned by his own principal in the college on whether the money raised would be going to ISIS, before being told that publicity for the fundraiser could not include quotes from Muslim figures. Just sort of added extra sort of layer of xenophobia on top of it. And other cases like the 14-year-old non-Muslim boy in this case, who was labelled a domestic extremist and pursued by Prevent for mentioning in class that he was an anti-fascist. But school falsely had claimed that the boy and his father had knowledge of what they called anti-fascist terrorist training camps and meetings, which I guess will probably sound very familiar to things we're hearing today about like Antifa today over there in America. So yeah, but even outside these sort of, I think it's important to note that the actual referrals that happen, of which there are thousands in any given year, like between 5,000 to 7,000 referrals happen in a year, but these are only like the tip of the iceberg. The sort of the day-to-day reality of Prevent is that's woven into every sphere of university life and social life more broadly. Like like the referrals outright, every referrals are sort of exception, and the rule is sort of like that people are being hooked up in sort of web surveillance for little to no reason. Yeah, so what Prevent has done in higher education, especially since 2015, when it's made law, is deepen and expand the integration of universities with arms of state surveillance. It like ratcheted up the risks of political organizing, as it enables universities to leverage counter-terror policy to victimize and target organizers. It has fragmented forces on campus, which should be working together. So it's pitted staff against students, because they're entrusted to mutually spy one another or work together, and undermines solidarity that we know is crucial to any sort of emancipatory politics. And it's contributed to a wider climate of self-policing and forced depoliticization, especially among Muslim students and Muslim young people. So Prevent matters then, again, in the context of HE, because it is intended to insulate university management from below, basically, and it allows for like a smooth transition into sort of the fully corporate, fully liberal university climate that they want. So I think it's important to recognize that Prevent is not alone in doing this, not the only sort of technique or mechanism or program. It's one in an increasing arsenal of surveillance and policing powers that have been introduced into universities in recent years. These include, for example, like immigration monitoring programs, which compel universities to police international students and staff, and opens them up to the risk of detention and deportation. It also includes, and I was speaking about it later in the meeting, about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which has been pushed very forcefully by government and other organizations in Britain, which, as you know, leads to discussion and organizing against Israeli colonialism and Zionism. Again, it's important to note that these policies don't operate in silos, but interconnect, so often overlap in many ways. So the increase in moves, for example, of the US, spearheaded by advocates of the IHRA definition, for example, to equate, firstly, anti-Zionism and Palestine activism with anti-Semitism. Secondly, to sort of equate anti-Semitism as a form of extremism. And thirdly, to therefore expose pro-Palestine activism to prevent interference and referrals and school intervention in various ways. And in my experience, this has definitely been the case. Like, so Palestine organizers are often at the sharpest end of Prevent in many ways, including on campuses like Palestine societies. So groups are the ones who've dealt with like often the worst cases to show for, and like the most not brutal, it's a bit randomly like most of the difficult situations. Yeah. Also, on the other hand, a Prevent referral, because it places individuals in like the crosshairs of state agencies, including immigration enforcement, can theoretically a referral could sort of escalate or contribute to immigration intervention somewhere down the line, including detention, potentially referral, potentially deportation, even in some cases theoretically again citizenship stripping. And yeah, to be clear, I think I spoke about a lot of bad things that happened, but there has been resistance to it. I think it's important to recognize that. So since academics have not taken these passively, these new moves, there's absolutely been resistance to the securitization of campuses. So in many ways, activism against Prevent has historically been strongest among universities for various reasons, which I'll go into in a bit. At high tide, around 30 student unions or 30 universities, student unions, had policy opposing Prevent and boycotting it, calling for boycott. This year there was a UCU strike. So UCU is a national union for like university workers, academics, and administrative. They had a national strike. There's a day of action against Prevent as part of that, and that was like the single largest day of action against it in many years. In terms of Palestine activism, was under a lot of lot of pressure. It's still like very vibrant, and it still regularly produces some of the best student activists in the country. I'm not saying that just because it's my background politically, as I came out of, but it's true. And activism around immigration policy has been very strong in very difficult circumstances, again, given sort of the state of our government. So lastly, the last one I'm focusing on is, I guess, where I think any print organizing, in universities has maybe not been up to par, has gone a bit wrong in some ways, or we took the wrong approach. And I'm hoping this can maybe, from my example, from my experience, it can maybe outline the approach you lot can take over there and learn from. Yeah, anti-prevent organizing has often hinged on one of two arguments. One is that it's Islamophobic and targets Muslims, and two is that it undermines like academic freedom, other liberal values, other university people seem to really hold dear for some reason. But sadly, I guess. Now, both of these are true. They're definitely Islamophobic, definitely targets sort of academic freedom and civil and free speech and whatever. But organizing is about more than just being right. It's about getting right. So I think these often fall short in the course of organizing because they don't present like a political conception of what the task is ahead of us. So for example, an understanding of prevent that is as being bad solely on account of being racist or Islamophobic may lead us to conclude that merely extending it to non-Muslim communities, as they have been in recent years, is a solution, like a 50-50 approach, half Muslims, half non-Muslim people, whatever. But again, to take this angle, sort of ignores the repressive function that is core to prevent and it's used as a political tool. So effectively expanding the reach and fundamentally aberrant policy is a reform that we don't want to see happening. We don't want any compromises. We want to see it go. Likewise, if our position to prevent only extends as far as the academic freedom argument, the fact that lecturers are being made life a little bit more difficult for them, as it is, then it sort of underplays the way that prevent was made possible, racism and Islamophobia, and also like this academic freedom argument. Ultimately, it does nothing for the working class Muslim communities that are at the sharpest end of the program and have been for 14 years. And I to be clear, when we're talking about sort of Muslim communities in Britain, we're talking about in many ways not just working class communities, but some of the most deprived communities in the country, like Bangladeshis in Britain, for example, Muslim have been at the bottom of every social indices, in every survey since like the 1970s when they came here. So we're talking about the bottom of the bottom, and academic freedom is nothing for them in day to day, and the realities that they're facing. Yeah, we need to do more work of bringing activism. Activism undertaken by students, academic and workers in the US on one side, and communities and other that exist beyond the university gates. Yeah, bring them together in a one sort of siloed approach where they're focused onto their own backyard or whatever. And for that, we need to integrate a framework for articulating why prevent is bad, which I'll describe very quickly through what we call the 5 R's, the 5 reasons, reasons why prevent is bad, for more like holistic approach to why prevent is bad. Sorry. So firstly, prevent is racist, clearly is. So Islamophobia and racism hardwired into prevent. Its disproportionate targeting of Muslims is an inevitability, not an aberration. The notions of extremism and terrorism are racialized through and through. We know who they're talking about when they say that. I know we all know it. Prevent draws upon this and it cements into policy. Secondly, prevent and indirect human rights. So we often use this term, but prevent has a chilling effect on legal rights and freedoms. Prevent will never say you can't exercise a freedom. But what we'll say is that you limit consequences if you do so. Probably has the same impact in the reality in day-to-day, and that undermines sort of existing legal safeguards and rights and so on. Thirdly, the third R is prevent is repressive. It's anti-democratic. It undermines civil liberties for all. It serves to instill a culture of fear, and it's a disciplinary tool, right? It puts the most precarious in institutions in our society, even more on a knife edge. Fourthly, it's reductive. So it operates. So in the words of government, prevent operates in the pre-crime space or the pre-criminal space. We think it's a bit of a misnomer. So rather we prefer like the non-criminal space, right? It does not solve crimes. It does not tackle violent offenses. It does not tackle quote-unquote terrorism. It only targets ideas. And so because of that, it can be proven to stop any actual attacks. But some people said that it may potentially be fueling some of us alienating and marginalizing certain communities. I don't particularly like that argument, but I think it's true. I think it's a bit weird. It's so true. And lastly, I guess, reshaping relations, right? Prevent reshapes relations. So it fundamentally twists relationships of trust into one suspicion. And again, it's anti-solidarity. It promotes division and mistrust rather than community support. And for that, for all these reasons, we need like holistic understanding of why prevent is bad, how it's not just like it can't be exceptionalized or compartmentalized as a Muslim issue. Is everyone's issue, it should be taken as everyone's issue, and we should be sort of targeted and combated together. I'll leave it there.
Nice. Thank you, Asfar. Thank you for breaking that down. I think between one thing we share when we talk about the programs here in the US, we talk about how prevent is a good 10 years ahead of the US with it. And so in a messed up way, but also in terms of resistance and fight back, in both ways, it's really great to hear from you all and just to really build this connection with you. So that being said, I know Celine and Akil had some questions regarding that, and also just wanted to put it out there. Asfar is open to taking, he said he's open to taking questions from other folks. So if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, or if you do raise hand, we can also call on you as well to unmute. So thank you so much for breaking that down. And really quick before I pass it to Celine, you know, it just, I think one of the things that really stuck out to me too that you said is that bridge, right, of the organizing that happens on campuses and in communities. And that's something for us we're constantly mindful of, right? Because a lot of times what we see is what happens in academia, there tends to be this, oh, we know what's better, right? But really we know it's the communities of people on the ground, who are also students, right? Who are also teachers. And so yeah, so thank you for naming that and discussing that. Celine, I'll go ahead and pass it on to you. And then I know Kil, you had a question. And again, if anyone has a question, feel free to put it in the chat.
Yeah, thank you again, Asfar, for talking about like how, you know, what the organizings looked like and how it's impacted people, and just how it's been playing out and how Prevent has been playing out in schools and in universities. I guess I just wanted, because, you know, it's important to show how where the trajectory of where countering violent extremism in the US is headed. I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about how it impacts families, and like just about how it can potentially impact immigration status. You talked about that a little bit, but if you can share a little bit more about that, I think that'd be also helpful for us to learn from.
I got the second half. That was the first part, sorry. So I got immigration and families.
Yeah, like how you talked a little bit about how it can also affect immigration status, like if someone is referred to Prevent. So I was just wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that, just to show also like a little bit more about how it impacts families and community members in the UK.
Sure. Okay. So every year the Home Office, so the government department which governs Prevent, releases stats on like referrals, and you can see in every year there's sort of like a subsection is comes from the immigration enforcement sort of services, and more importantly, that they're basically once like they've got you through the door effectively, data exchange is sort of like it's very porous between government Home Office departments. So I'm saying at this point it's theoretical. I imagine it has happened, but I can't say like possible to prove it at this point in time. But because information has been sort of shared between government departments, if someone has been referred to Prevent some sort of insecure sort of immigration status, there's a potential of that being flagged up as a consequence of their referral, and then be sort of like filtered on to the relevant department, leading to further intervention down the line. What we have had though is that there's only one of like increasing sort of like matrix of policies around extremism and counterterrorism. I mean, I have other citizenship deprivation powers are in some ways contingent on the idea of what they call conduciveness to public good. So if someone is deemed not conducive to public good, there's grounds for revoking citizenship. If you're accused or deemed like subversive or like potential radicalized, potentially extremist, quote unquote, terrorists, that can lead to, again, on that basis, your citizenship being revoked under certain circumstances. That has happened in certain cases. It hasn't been Prevent per se, but then it's all, again, I want to sort of avoid this too hard distinction, we prevent other forms of fairness and equity. In terms of families, so yeah, again, in any given year, again, from the stats, a third of, over half of referrals between 2015 and now have been young people, right? People under 20. Often young people, often from schools, colleges, and below. And this has come about in part because this turned in 2015 after it became law, rebranding Prevent as a safeguarding mechanism, or as in latching onto existing practices of safeguarding and protecting student welfare. And so that legitimizes targeting of young people in a big way. What this has done is sort of I guess provide like a soft entry point for Prevent into sort of the more intimate spheres of a young person's life, student life. So you provide sugarcoating for what effectively surveillance policies, national security policies, of implicate the youngest people in society. And thirdly, in terms of families, again, it's been a long-term drive to, in the early days of Prevent, there was like this drive to sort of like capture, I guess, mothers, right, Muslim mothers, or Muslim women in Muslim communities, will be, as they imagine, sort of like the less radical member of the community, as counterparts to like the radical men, which I was conceptualized. In recent years, that's changed somewhat. Mothers have been deemed in themselves potential radicalizing factors. So again, see where the sort of like safeguarding drive and sort of like drive towards like potentially criminalizing Muslim mothers has come together. And again, it's sort of designated the family and sort of like the family sphere as like a site for Prevent to sort of intervene more heavily, more aggressively, more actively to find out our young people are being radicalized, why they're radicalized, who's doing it, is it their parents, and so on and so forth. It helps like things. It's been a big push to sort of target young people and by extension target families. Yeah.
Thank you so much for responding to all of that. I just saw a question also in the chat from Dr. Aziz, which is asking, what's your take on how COVID and the British state responses to COVID have impacted struggles that you're involved with, or furthered securitization?
Cool. Some of these. So I think I actually wrote about this earlier in the year. I'll share in the comments, partly because I forgot I wrote in it. I'm sort of off memory trying to remember. There has been definitely a big drive, obviously, as I've seen other countries sort of like ramp up security policies and policing policies off the back of the pandemic and the sort of management of the pandemic. In terms of prevent specifically, the main thing we've seen is sort of prevent practitioners have made this push to sort of capture proliferation like theories around COVID as sort of a new extremism, right? So they're all trying to find new ways of like capturing new behaviors that will agree with them or disagree with them is irrelevant, and trying to sort of bring them into the purview of extremism. And the main thing we've seen from their end is to sort of mark out, theories as extremists, and we should come on and sort of the purview of prevent. I guess that's the main thing. There are different other forms like law that passed in March. So March just after lockdown, started here. It was like 3 policies that sort of meant that any protest organised in the country has to be sort of like approved by police and offer for approval and so on and so forth. And our form of security in that sense, it expanded police powers more generally. I can't remember when that, to be honest. I'll share the report in the comments. Hopefully it'll be more there. But yeah, it's been a big drive towards it, and I think it has its terrain in many ways. I think organizations realizing, especially in the new year, sort of one, I guess, take back the sort of ground in terms of rights that we have had or have lost potentially, or on a very like in the on a thread, and I guess bring the issues that we have been on the back burner like prevent back onto the agenda, because people have been obviously sadly concerned about more material practical things for them, and so that's in some ways sort of polarizing for some people.
So another question, and I think you've spoken to this from different angles throughout other things you were saying today, but one big difference that has arisen in our conversations with Cage is the way that Prevent has rolled out in the UK versus CVE, where Prevent emerged as this national program that actually sparked a lot of outrage at the beginning. And then one thing that Asfar has shared is that over time they've sought to dispel that outrage through different types of reforms, or even whitewashing the actual effects of it, guardrails, protections, etc. And one of the things that we're noticing in the US is this sort of more opposite direction, where they're trying to build up to a larger, more nationalized version of these programs through these disparate programs that emerge kind of like through even sometimes a framework where they claim to be fighting white supremacy through this violent extremism framework, but we see that as a Trojan horse, And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about also, Asfar, is the sense of how has Cage fought against these attempts to reform Prevent, and what do you notice as the way that the UK uses those tactics to actually try to either concretize or expand Prevent, or like buy off or pressure off opposition in order to dispel the outrage that originally was there a few years ago when Prevent was unveiled?
Cool. Yes, I guess the main thing they've done is that, like you said, America sort of drive to target what they call far extremism, which is really a problem to deal with, because it's been used to present a policy which fundamentally targets Muslims and makes life indescribably more difficult, and having like work on their behalf, and sort of highlighting that sort of the contradictions of that, and sort of like the sort of barefacedness of that. I guess is something we're trying to do. Our position generally has always been like, I guess, how to put this, we have our principles, have our position, and we stick with them, and we run out for them, basically. And our position has always been, we don't agree with reforms. I guess go entirely. In terms of off the back of trying to get an article, sorry. There's also as part of that since 2016. There's been sort of two. So initially, to be clear, in 2006 when it was introduced policy, it was very explicit about the fact they targeted what they call Al-Qaeda inspired terrorism, so Muslims in that case. And they said that even though the other forms are like at that point they mentioned far right, so these are not really pressing issues at this point in time. Our priority is to focus on Muslims here, and Islamist extremism, other terms like that. That remained the case in 2006. In 2011, when they sort of rebranded the policy, they sort of introduced it for the first time as far right as being a potential target, but it wasn't a big drive to do it. And definitely it was far behind in terms of referrals. It still was majority Muslims. In 2016, that changed somewhat, and there has been a more like a quite I guess aggressive drive on the part of governments to like make a show of the fact they're targeting far extremism, quote unquote, and also to do it. So that the stats do show there is an increase. Like take it as one of I think that has been the case. As part of that has been like a move to again bring together the issue of hate crime policing, and counter-extremism. Well, there's sort of two ways in 3 steps to do this, right? So first, Islamophobia and other forms of hate are like decoupled from the broader political culture of the British political class and exceptionalized, as a preserver like a societal fringe of the far right of the extremists out there. Secondly, like hateful activity is collapsed as a form of extremism and must be tackled by surveillance and so on and so forth. And that's in turn usually obviously legitimize the funding, expansion, and mainstreaming of the very counter-extremism matrix. And the hate crime angle, I think, has been a very crucial part to how they managed to sort of spearhead it. But obviously, the last 4 years have been this period, post the EU referendum in Britain, and post sort of it was like an assassination of an MP at the time too in 2016. At that point, sort of far right that person. Off the back of that, they sort of like made a lot of headway by making a big deal about the fact that they're using this to target far right. And I think hate crime is key way they're doing it. I think the issue again is sort of how they speak to those communities, where it's just trying to be concerned about the issue of attacks and so on, which is very real. But not falling into the trap of accepting policies that are designed on their backs, honed on their backs, sort of, and then imagine that this can be used in their service. I think trying to do that's like ongoing fight with sort of engaging with speaking to our community, so like engaging for falling for that. In terms of how they've done it. So there has definitely been, all has been sort of the two-pronged armor, right? They've been attacking those communities, but have always been subsection, which is trying to like cope and get on side. In the early days of Brent from 2006 to 2010, sort of there were groups which were funded by Brent, sort of manufactured civil society groups, Muslim groups, which is sort of like echo and parrot the government line. Since 2011, when it was rebranded, and with the new right government, they're sort of taken a harder line with Muslim organizations. They made a lot more. Like a line in sand and said any organization that does not abide by our sort of principles or values and X, Y, and Z, we're no longer engaged with them. A lot of the Muslim organizations which had enjoyed patronage, enjoyed support, enjoyed funding in the early days, were now cut from that. And I think what respect, sort of like the balance of forces is changing somewhat. It is still, so what it means the government is still like deeply hostile to any Muslim organization, to be honest, outright. But there's certain sections within like sort of like ruling apparatus or certain sections of policing, certain sections of counter-terrorism force themselves who can recognize, we can take a slightly different tack and get certain elements of the Muslim community on board and sort of get them to sort of justify it, especially if it's hate crime angle. And so they sort of put for the sort of like, it's no longer the government doing it, but certain like sort of agencies adjacent to government which are trying to court or reach out to Muslim communities to sort of bring them on side again. Again, our position has to be they have to be sort of engaged, diffused, if necessary, call out, more aggressively dealt with, I guess, in a nice way.
So what I'm hearing is that they shift the narrative away from overt counterterrorism towards this hate crime narrative. They use the community's real need for protection against white supremacist violence, and then they basically try to instrumentalize certain people within the community to accept the framework as the way that they can quote unquote get protection, even though it's very clear that the history of the program and its current intent is just to target the community in the first place. Yeah. And it's really interesting because we're going to be talking later on in this call too about the way hate crimes, like one example of the instrumentalization of this hate crime narrative is even Blue Lives Matter bills, which characterize violence against, so-called violence against cops as a hate crime. It's really interesting to see the connections on that narrative too, because one of the organizations that we're looking at also compiles lists of hate crimes around the world, which are again influenced by their own narrative of what constitutes hate. So that's interesting. Any other questions from the chat for Asfar in his last few minutes before he rightfully goes to sleep? Thank you again, by the way.
Yes, thank you, Asfar. And I know Asfar, earlier you had also shared some of your.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, I was just saying, I'll go ahead and put the links to the reports. I know you shared them earlier and we've had folks join the last couple minutes. So I'll be sharing some of Cage's reports on the chat as well. Was there another question that we missed?
Oh, no, I think you may have already said it. It was on the comment around the report on Christchurch mosque attacks in New Zealand.
Oh,
So,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dr. Chaudhary, for sharing that resource with us too.
Really quickly, Asfar, is there any kind of action from CAGE that we can help with virtually from here that you would want to share to the community in the chat, in addition to where we can find resources? You know, we have the reports and stuff like that. But yeah, if there's anything that we can click on and support over here that you want to share with us. And then go for it. Oh, and then I was going to also just say that Shazana from earlier also offered to answer questions that people have if we would email them to her. So if you have questions as well, keep putting them in the chat even after Asfar has to leave. Questions for Kate. But yeah, Cage, sorry, Asfar, go for it if you have any ways that we can support Cage's work.
At this point in time, in terms of print specifically, can't actually think of anything. Obviously, print is only one of our campaigns that I focus on, and I think we're doing at this point in time, happily focus on something else as a priority. Yeah, there's no particular campaign. I think definitely if you're interested in organize against it, and sort of want to learn from our experience, happy to sort of speak to you about it. I'll post now our website there. I post some comments on my email, my personal email, well, my work email actually. If anyone's contacting me about anything, yeah, feel free to open inbox. I guess the main thing I could do is that if you can sort of, the strong campaign in America, build strong local examples. I think it sort of helps us to say so forth as well. I guess the best thing you can do for us is sort of, work hard on your end, as you are doing clearly. That's it.
Awesome.
Nice. Thank you again. Thank you so much. And so, and a lot of what you were talking about was around, around Palestinian organizing and everything. And so that makes a very good sense for us to transition into PYM, Palestinian Youth Movement. And as for you're welcome to stay the whole time, of course, but if you have to go. So
I just need to wash up my dishes for a bit before my wife wakes up, so I'm gonna be here sort of from a distance.
Sounds great.
Thank you again.
All right. Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Celine. Passing it on to you.
All right, awesome. Thanks again, Asfar, so much, and all the folks at CAGE. For folks who joined after Asfar and Shazana started presenting, it's 3 a.m. now, I think, where they're at. So yeah, please share appreciations in the chat. Okay, so my name is Celine Cosini. I am with the Palestinian Youth Movement, along with Ruby, who's also on this call. And she'll be sharing some of the pieces a bit later around CVE and the impact on Palestinian students. But okay, and just a note also for folks who joined more recently, if y'all could please share your name, gender pronouns, your city, or just where you're calling from, and your organizational affiliation, if any, in the chat, that would be greatly appreciated. We're just asking folks for security reasons, just to make sure we don't have any Zoom bombers, because we definitely have that had that before. But yeah, so the reason we're focusing on CVE, again, now the explained part of the larger fight against the war on youth, and the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and in partnership with us at the Palestinian Youth Movement, have been organizing a campaign to combat countering violent extremism in education, specifically combating violent extremism in K-12 schools, as well as in academic institutions. So we do have a coalition of students and professors, academics that are of college students and academics that are working around combating CVE in academia, and I'll drop the email for folks who are interested in joining that effort. And we're also going to be talking about CVE in K-12 schools, and we'll be focusing on examples in California. So yeah, our campaign is basically addressing the surveillance and profiling of Muslim, Black, Brown, Indigenous, Arab youth in K-12 schools, and how these countering violent extremism programs are deputizing educators and K-12 staff to report on their own students. And we created a handful of resources and are going to be more publicly launching this campaign hopefully earlier on next year. So today we're kind of going to be like piloting our slides and some of the materials that we do have now. So I'm just gonna, Asfa and Shazana explained Prevent and how it's been operating in the United Kingdom. And I'm gonna explain a little bit about how countering violent extremism is operating in the US and the basic premise of it. So, and if you've been on these calls, you know this, so, but I'm gonna repeat it for the folks who are joining for the first time. Oh, awesome. Arizona Palestine Solidarity Alliance, it's great, thanks for joining. So countering violent extremism framework and programs are based on the idea that there is such a thing as a clear and identifiable path to extremism or radicalization, and that there are indicators that can reveal when someone's on that path. And the CVE indicators for extremism are broad enough to target the everyday activities of Muslims. They range between, everyday community or religious practices to political activism. And the idea that there is a path to radicalization is completely scientifically unsound and has been repeatedly debunked, yet it's the premise for the whole framework. And then, so radicalization theory, which is part of the premise of CVE, posits, and radicalization theory initially came out of Islamophobic policies in Europe, and it posits that the increased religiosity and politicization of Muslims leads to an increased threat of violence or terrorism. And this framework also has its legacy in the long history of policing of Black communities, including law enforcement's utilization of the broken windows policing model, which theorizes that local, cultural, and social everyday norms play a role in the development of criminal activity. And that would justify, in turn, the policing of everyday life in Black communities, insinuating that something small can lead to a large crime. And this logic is really deeply racist because it implies that, of course, criminality or terrorism are inherent to communities, to certain communities. So the idea is that they're basically linking activities that are common for specific communities with the quote unquote potential for crime or potential for terrorism, thus justifying the policing and surveillance of our everyday lives and of our entire communities. So we can go to the stalker state slide if Nadia wants to talk about that, but first I can also share that the Department of Homeland Security initially started launching countering violent extremism around 2011, and then piloted the program in Los Angeles, Boston, and Minneapolis around 2014. And in that initial launch, the Department of Homeland Security outlined indicators of extremism, which included regularly attending a mosque, not trusting law enforcement, being part of an ethnic, cultural, or religious student group, traveling to the Middle East, growing a beard or facial hair, being critical of US foreign policy. So these are all things that probably all of us on this call can relate to, but all of these quote unquote indicators of extremism are what the Department of Homeland Security explicitly outlined as potential indicators that someone is on a path towards radicalization, and that would justify surveillance and criminalization of all of us, basically, in the Muslim community and broadly, Black Muslim community, Black community more broadly. And this also, there are other iterations of these programs that are impacting specific communities, which we'll get into in a bit. But yeah, first I want to pass it to Nadia and Akil to share a little bit about the stalker state and about how information sharing environments and multidisciplinary teams operate and the relationships to countering violent extremism.
Thank you, Celine. Yeah, and also just want to let folks know, if you, as we're talking, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to be also doing, we're going to be going through some articles and give folks opportunity to talk as well. But just wanted to remind folks that the chat is open for you to put any questions as we're going through it. But this, what you see on the screen is what we call the stalker state. And the reason we call it the stalker state is because all of these circles, which is basically like a bunch of Venn diagrams, if y'all remember doing those maybe in school, is really how the various ways that the state, and of course, private companies as well, stalk and trace and criminalize our communities. And the information sharing environment was actually officially established under the Obama administration. And so we know, of course, this is nothing new, as we say in the coalition, that these aren't moments in time, but they're continuation of longer histories. But now with Biden being elected, just want to remind folks that this framework of CVE and the information sharing environment really took full force and will continue to be full force under a Democrat administration, right? And so just as that reminder. And so really quickly, just to kind of tell you about these circles, some of you have already seen this as well. We could spend hours on this, but I'll do it in about a minute or two. But each circle really looks at then what are the different roles of those aspects of society within the stalker state, within the information sharing environment. So we have the public sector, right, which is schools, hospitals, social media, transportation, etc. Then, of course, we have the Department of Injustice, as we like to call it. And then in the middle, because we are based here in LA, we have the LAPD architecture of surveillance, which actually also has its own diagram, which I can link to folks in the chat. And so the middle part really then looks at what is LAPD's role within stalking and criminalizing our communities. Right below, you see a smaller circle that says fusion centers. There's over 80 in the country, and one of the largest ones is actually here in LA County, in Norwalk. And the fusion centers is basically where these centers, these hubs, where as data and information is collected, it gets funneled into the fusion centers, and then the fusion centers share it then with thousands of other agencies as well. And so then of course, there's the Office of Director of National Intelligence, the NSA, and then the private sector. Now, the private sector, as we know, for hundreds of years now, companies and private corporations have been making money and have been profiting off of the genocide and violence on Black and brown bodies. And so the private sector is very much connected to the stalker state as well. And within this diagram, because it can be very overwhelming sometimes to see, oh man, these are all the ways that me and my family or that our peoples are getting criminalized. One thing we talk about right in the coalition is how do we build power, not paranoia? And so what I like to talk about with this diagram is how, in the journey to abolition, it's all about chipping away, right? How are we chipping away? How are we slowly taking it down, brick by brick? And so within this, we've already, been able to here in LA dismantle some of these programs, such as predictive policing, which will be, which Hamid is going to talk a little bit about later as well, and also the chronic offender bulletin, drones. LAPD did adapt a drone program, but it was really because of community pressure that they were forced to keep them grounded for several years. So just want to make that reminder, and laser as well. Laser has been dismantled. So there's been, so with all of these programs, right, no matter, even as overwhelming as this is, slowly but surely, it's really been people power. Of course, not by the graces of the state at all, and we would never expect that, but it really has been people power that has forced some of these programs to be dismantled. So yeah, I'll pass it on to you, Akil. And then if you wanted to add anything, and again, as a reminder, feel free to put any questions in the chat. You're on mute, Akil.
Okay, so and firstly, also just a reminder in case people do have to or have just come in or need to leave early or whatever, I want to say it multiple times over the meeting. We have our working meeting next Wednesday, December 16th at 4 p.m. We're already working on some tasks such as going through public records requests that we've downloaded from other people's records, sketching out plans for public popular education videos, for doing strategy, outreach, social media posts. So message me or Celine or Nadia your email if you would like to attend next Wednesday at 4 p.m. Wednesday, December 16th. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to be working on is basically combating CVE in K-12 education. And one of the ways that we've really discovered that it comes out, I mean, when CVE was debuted, it was debuted in 3 different cities with historic Black Muslim communities, and one of them was Boston, which has also a very strong Somali community. And so Celine knows a little bit more about these specific programs. One of the things that we saw that they were not just coming from DHS, but they actually also came from other agencies such as the State Department, and that it involved using programs to build trust in law enforcement, but actually the community themselves was constantly treated as untrustworthy and suspicious. So Celine, if you want to talk a little bit more about some of the specific Massachusetts programs, then I'll talk about the LA ones.
Yeah, so these programs in general, they're basically about training educators to look at students through a counterterrorism lens. And they offer trainings to encourage, to basically teach educators to the indicators of extremism, so that if a student exhibits one of those indicators of extremism, again, which includes really basic things like, again, being too much into one's culture or expressing criticism of US foreign policy, so on and so on, that they would report on those students, which could lead to criminalization of those students. So it would be about integrating the countering violent extremism indicators into those into mandated reporting, which educators are already required to do. Let's see. So one of the programs. So these programs are CVE programs that Muslim Justice League in Boston has been combating for years, and they've really targeted Somali Muslim youth in Boston. So one of the programs is called the Youth and Police Initiative Plus, which is directly funded by the Department of Homeland Security, and which targets Somali youth ages 13 to 17, basically treating them as inherently susceptible to quote unquote extremism. And the idea is that they were, one of the goals is to have like police directly build with students, and it's basically a form of community policing in schools, and basically seeing any kind of resistance to that as potentially suspicious activity. And they would also train, the idea was to train educators, but also to build relationships or train students to identify indicators of extremism themselves, so that it would also be kind of like creating this environment of reporting on each other. And there's also another really similar program called Operation 250 in Boston, which is developed with a university, with the University of Massachusetts, and has direct funding also from the state, from federal law enforcement, which offers trainings, again, for K through 12 educators about the CVE indicators of extremism. So what we were seeing with these programs in schools is that they're really targeting Muslim youth, Black Muslim youth in schools, specifically in Boston, and in a lot of the pilot cities, including Los Angeles and Minneapolis. And that the grants weren't only coming from the Department of Homeland Security, but there are also academic institutions that are involved. And again, as I said before, we do have this coalition going that is combating CVE in academia, because one of the initiatives and one of the goals of the Department of Homeland Security is to utilize universities to be able to produce research that legitimizes countering violent extremism, but also to utilize universities as a way to leverage the trust and relationships that universities have to kind of like implement CVE with any of the institutions, like community institutions or K through 12 schools that the university already has relationships with. And this goes back to the entire function of CVE, like the way it operates. It's right now it's been disguised as this like quote unquote community-led alternative to heavy-handed law enforcement. So instead of directly having police in schools, they might say, well, we can implement countering violent extremism. But what they're basically doing is that they're still policing and they're still surveilling, even though police might not physically be present. So that's kind of how CVE would operate. And they basically are partnering the Department of Homeland Security or CVE programs that basically partner with institutions that already have a relationship with community, like a school, or basically an institution where community members already receive services from, and leverage that relationship to attain information. So in this way, the federal government doesn't really have to worry about sending in FBI agents and realizing that, oh, the community doesn't trust them, they're not going to report anything to them. They're basically leveraging trust that's already earned, and asking us to do the reporting, like on each other, training us that this is the way that we're going to fight quote unquote terrorism and extremism, and that we have to report on each other. So obviously this creates multiple consequences. It creates suspicion and mistrust within our communities. Basically asking us to do that work of surveilling each other, asking our educators, our community leaders, asking our service providers to identify and report on their own community members based on these really racist, quote unquote, indicators of radicalization. And it also obviously has a huge chilling effect on any kind of dissent or criticisms of like US foreign policy, or criticisms of or basically any kind of involvement in political activism. It also impacts our communities by criminalizing us and deeming us as inherently susceptible to violence or terrorism, which again is deeply racist logic. And obviously it makes learning environments a lot less safe for our communities, because it even discourages us from being very salient in our own identities and cultures as well. So those are a couple of the consequences of these programs and how they impact our communities. And I just want to also kind of elaborate a little bit on preventing violent extremism, because these programs are all basically, it's all the same premise, but PVE was initially launched by the FBI to target youth in schools specifically. And the indicators that the FBI outlined literally included being too much into one's culture, quote unquote, being in poverty, or expressing anger in school assignments. And that would be categorized as quote unquote suspicious behavior. And that would, require educators to report on that suspicious behavior. And then again, as Nadi was saying earlier, with the Black identity extremism framework from the FBI, categorizing Black activists as potential terrorists or extremists. So we're seeing the conflation of this language of terrorism to criminalize different communities. And overall, CVE, again, is a form of community policing, where they're encouraging these partnerships between law enforcement and communities, and encouraging us to look at each other, or encouraging educators, service providers, community leaders to look at community through a counterterrorism lens. And because these are all premised on these preventative policing models, and they're fundamentally anti-Black and anti-Muslim, and they've really expanded to target so many different communities. And are a part of the larger apparatus of state violence and surveillance that is criminalizing our communities. So that's part of like the larger stalker state that Nadia was talking about. And again, these frameworks justify the creation of these information sharing environments and referral networks, which are currently being created, and something that Asfar was talking about that already exists in the UK. These are being created here and strengthened here to encourage community members to report on each other, and to basically expand the reach of policing and expand surveillance, expand the reach of law enforcement into spaces that they wouldn't have already had access to, basically by offering communities these grants. So, okay, I kind of went on. So I'll pass it back to you, Akil, if you want to talk more about the California examples of CVE in schools.
Okay, so the first thing that I'll just really quickly say is that we are basing our narrative on this existing extreme criminalization of youth of color, and especially Black youth in LA schools. And one of the things that we really are looking to for knowledge is, Stop LAPD Spying actually even produced a really incredible report on the Department of Children and Family Services in partnership with researchers from UCLA, and basically how the mandated reporting system is already being used being weaponized to tear children from families. So that mandated reporting system that we're seeing in UK, adopting this counter-terrorist framing, it's already being used in racist ways here. And it's actually, so there's a narrative of neglect that is really deep around, especially sort of this notion of parenting for people of color. And I think that we're expecting to see that narrative being folded in to include extremism, terrorism, hate, etc. And then the other thing that we saw is that UCLA even recommended that LA's school threat assessment response team, this is UCLA researchers funded by the DHS, they recommended that that be the place that they implement CVE when they do implement it. And we also, so we see the existing sort of framework of policing youth under the framework of stopping school violence. We see the framework of policing youth under the framework of neglect. And then we also see the framework of policing youth under the framework of gangs. So these are three things that already exist in deep ways in the LA area. So based on that, one of the things that we're seeing in LA in terms of CVE programs is so we'll actually talk about it when we talk about TVTP, because one of the programs that we see, it actually is just starting. So there was a organization that received a grant in 2018 and then received another grant in 2020. And we're going to be talking about it a few slides from now. And we're seeing they're going to be implementing this on top of this existing framework of policing youth. So we'll talk about that when we talk about the newest round of CVE grants and what's going to LA. But really quickly before we do that, Nadia is going to talk about how we build power among youth as well, not just talking about them.
Yes, happy to do that. Wanted to just pause and see if there are any questions right now so far with what we've shared. I know we've been sharing quite a bit. I just want to take a quick pause, see if anyone would like to unmute and ask a question or put any question in the chat. I don't see my participants list. I don't know. Okay, I don't see anybody. Okay, but yes, again, feel free to ask any questions throughout. So this is basically, this is the UTLA pledge. So the UTLA is the United Teachers of Los Angeles, which is, the second largest school district in the country. And this was from a few years ago when we first got wind of preventing violent extremism. So of course, one of the first groups we went to were teachers, right, and students. And so this pledge was basically UTLA. Initially, it was just against preventing violent extremism, but then, of course, knowing that PVE is part of the larger CVE, right? A lot of acronyms, the larger Countering Violent Extremism framework. And so this basically was a very strong motion that was passed by the union, which is represented by around 33,000 people are part of this union. And so this motion played a strong role in also when the mayor rejected a grant for CVE, over $400,000 grant. And of course, not because he wanted to be nice or cares, but really it was because of the pressure. And this UTLA pledge was one of the key roles in that. And so that's, so we've also been building with the teachers union. And then on the right, you see a small picture there of a butcher paper. And that is a current work in progress. It was started last year by a group of high school students. It's one of our workshops. And it was further developed by some high school students who also interned with the coalition over last summer. And really what it's looking at is how are young people, so our Stalker State diagram, but focused more than on youth, right? So really from the home to the school, on the street, in the park, how are young people also being stalked? And so that is a work in progress. And that is something, if you do join our working group, that's one thing we're also going to be working on building out as well. So I just wanted to remind folks and invite folks to that too.
Yeah, I dropped our emails in the chat. So especially if you're a student or a teacher, we would love for you to be involved more and to talk to you more about your experiences as well. So I'm just going to quickly talk about the Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Program. So basically, this is the rebranding of Countering Violent Extremism. It was rebranded in March of this year, and we saw the grants released in September. And it was basically another $10 million grant cycle. And we can go to the next slide. These are all of the 2020 grantees. So I see, folks on here from different states. There's definitely involvement in DC, involvement in Arizona, like there's grants in Arizona, New York, in California, there's a few. So Utah, Oklahoma, they're all over the place. And these are this is the grantee list. And we're going to also be talking about one of our targets, which is an institution that accepted CVE funding that is going to be implementing CVE here in California or in Los Angeles. It's based in Los Angeles right now. That we're going to be targeting primarily as part of our CVE Out of Our Schools campaign. And that is the Simon Wiesenthal Center. So this is a center that has received a Preventing Violent Extremism grant in 2019 from the California Office of Emergency Services. So already has a track record of accepting CVE funds. And it is basically, and it has accepted grants from, a grant from the recent 2020 Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention grant. And it's basically trying to implement CVE, focusing on the K through 12. So it's partnering with educational institutions, K through 12 schools to basically train on indicators of extremism and utilizing this like countering hate framework. So one of the major ways that they're doing this also is through implementing or pushing schools to basically adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which equates anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. So as part of this like whole countering violent extremism program and the whole countering violent extremism operation in schools, trying to integrate a criminalization of anti-Zionism as well. So I'm gonna pass it off to Ruby from Palestinian Youth Movement to share a little bit more about what that definition is and how it actually impacts us. And then we'll go into an activity and discussion.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the IHRA definition. I know it was mentioned a few times today, and we just want to make sure that we're clear on what it is. And you may have heard about it in the last few months. It's been widely adopted throughout the US and other countries. So briefly, I just want to, before I get into it, I want to actually read the definition. So the IHRA is, it stands for the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And it's they label themselves as an intergovernmental organization. And so they created this definition of anti-Semitism. So I'm reading from their website. The definition says, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So with that definition alone, there's nothing weird or alarming about that. It sounds very normal. But something to note is it's also super, super vague. So it's something that is kind of supposed to be like an umbrella term, so that it doesn't set off alarms, and it's something that like no one can really disagree with. You know, this is an accurate explanation of anti-Semitism. But what's really alarming about this definition is that it doesn't stand alone with that definition. It actually comes with 11 examples that are listed under it. And so since the definition is so broad, when governments or institutions adopt this definition, the rules that they are using to implement it are the examples that are listed below. And so one of the examples, which I'll read out now, is actually very alarming. So let me read it here. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, example, by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. So that's kind of like a sneaky thing that they plugged in there, which basically allows any institution that adopts this definition to use that as an example of what anti-Semitism is. So that's basically equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And so this is like a rule that has been adopted by states, by institutions, by universities. And earlier this year in January, President Trump actually signed an executive order to adopt this definition. And so, and that was really, and I kind of want to uplift what Asfar was saying earlier with kind of that like bridge between state and education tactics. So like this is something that was adopted by the state, and it was heavily implemented in universities. So when Trump signed this executive order, a bunch of Students for Justice in Palestine chapters across universities in the US started facing lawsuits. A lot of their divestment campaigns were getting repealed. So this is something that is used as a repression tactic against Palestinians because of that one example under the definition that states that basically criticism of Israel and denying Jewish people of their self-determination to having the state of Israel and claiming that Israel is a racist state is in fact anti-Semitic. And so I'm going to send a link in the chat now with the statement the National SJP actually released against Trump's executive order in January. So this was a statement that was drafted by and signed on by hundreds of SJP chapters across the nation who are facing repression from the adoption of this definition. And this definition is adopted by the UK, now the US, and I believe it's in the process of being adopted by Canada. So this is something that is basically dismissing Palestinian voices. It's in adopting this definition, it even defines a lot of Palestinian writing, like Edward Said, different Palestinian scholars of basically what the Palestinian narrative is of the liberation movement as something that's anti-Semitic. So yeah, and I think I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Ruby. That was really helpful. And I just wanted to say, building off of that, the Palestinian Youth Movement has, different chapters across North America, including in Canada. And because of this push in Canada as well, our Toronto chapter is really heavily involved with combating the IHRA definition. So they've been working with some organizations there on this No IHRA campaign. And I believe there's a website. I think if you just go to noihra.ca, I think you can find that information. It's and there are efforts to combat this definition of anti-Semitism. Again, it's being pushed globally. It's not only being pushed here, but what the focus of our campaign is and how this relates to our campaign is that not only is this definition of anti-Semitism being pushed in schools, but institutions are utilizing CVE funding or to directly push this, to criminalize any criticism of Israel. So that is the direct tie to our campaign, and the primary target will be the Simon Wiesenthal Center in our anti-CVE campaign, combating it in schools, because this is the primary organization that is pushing countering violent extremism in schools, in addition to a few other institutions, but this is also one of our primary targets. So I just wanted to say that also more explicitly, and again, that we're kind of like piloting our workshop and like what we're going to be targeting today with you all, but we'd love to also hear feedback. And again, like, please email us, connect with us beyond this meeting, so that during our working meetings, we can talk more deeply about all of this and launch more publicly early next year. So I'll pass it over to Akil, who's going to facilitate a quick activity with us about this.
So first of all, thank you so much to Ruby and Celine from PYM. One of the things that we want to do really quickly right now with this IHRA definition, I'm going to share this doc in the chat, and basically this will give you an opportunity to read it for yourself, and it not only gives you a chance to read it, but I'm going to invite you to click on one of the two links on the top to compare it with. I'm pulling up the activity. There's two other things that I'm sharing that I'm comparing it to. So choose one or the other to compare it to. One is a little news article from The Intercept about Blue Lives Matter bills that treat police as a discriminated against protected category under hate crime laws. And then the other one is actually a summary of the law that was passed in Arizona that banned ethnic studies. Before it was actually overturned by the Supreme Court, this law banned ethnic studies under the premise that ethnic studies itself is racist or is pushing to overthrow the US government, etc. And so to choose one or the other one of those, either the one about Blue Lives Matter bills or ethnic studies, and then the text of the IHRA definition is also here. And we're going to take a second to read these. If you want, you can focus on the other two articles because Ruby gave us such a thorough summary of IHRA. But if you also want to read IHRA too, go for it. And instead of doing breakout groups, what we're actually going to do is after we read it for a few minutes, we're going to discuss it out loud in this larger group. And some of the questions to focus on as you're reading are, what are some of the common themes you notice? What experiences of yours or something, what are something that you witnessed or experienced that relates to these themes? And who do these definitions and bills benefit and who do they harm? So feel free to open up the link. I'm going to post it one more time in the chat. And choose one of the two things to compare it to, either the Blue Lives Matter bill article or the law that basically that banned ethnic studies.
Akil, would you mind maybe quickly typing that? I was trying to type the direction that you want folks to do in the chat as well. Thank you. And just to clarify, we're comparing it, the doc you just sent, the last link, to one of the two previous definitions, right?
No, we're comparing it to either a Blue Lives Matter bill article or to the ban on ethnic studies. So comparing IHRA, so here's the article on Blue Lives Matter bills. And here's the article on the ban, here's the text, the ban on ethnic studies. So choose one or two of these two things that I just shared in the chat and try to think, how does this connect to the IHRA definition? What are some similarities or differences? Okay, the IHRA definition is also right here on this article right here. And when I say compare with the IHRA definition, I'm also saying looking also at the examples that the IHRA give of what is anti-Semitism too, as Ruby was talking about. Since it's a small crew, if you're thinking of things as you read it and you want to share it, why don't you can share right now too. You can ask to unmute. Andrew says, common theme is both try to prohibit having an analysis beyond individual people who are racist because of private prejudice. And also both are focused on discrimination. rather than structural. Individual rather than structural is one of the themes. Yeah, and also, yeah, we can unmute you if you raise your hand. Hamid says both seem to value and protect people with a lot of resources. Steve says, Steve says, I looked at the Blue Lives one. Both are making a false narrative of victimhood. Wow. So putting the person who is the aggressor as the victim. One thing that I noticed is that both Blue Lives Matter bill and the IHRA definition put something that's a choice as an identity. It's a choice whether or not to be a cop, and it's a choice whether or not to be a Zionist, and it casts it as an identity. Oh, Hamid, I think the person that's Hamid Khan here might be Jamie, because I saw Jamie's face briefly earlier. I might be wrong.
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to sensationalize anything. But yeah. Oh, so it's weird. Are you, Jamie, using the coalition's account? I guess.
Yeah, I changed my name.
Okay, sorry. Okay, didn't mean to cause a ruckus. People are like, oh shit.
Hamid thought there was an impersonator.
I know.
Wait, where's my halo?
My students do that sometimes. I'm like, why is there three of you? Like, who's really who? So I'm glad you figured that out.
Sorry for that. Didn't really mean to cause any weirdness.
What did you think someone was impersonating you, Hamid?
No, I was like, well, I mean, this is just the latest infiltration from somewhere way out there.
I'm really curious if anybody read the ethnic studies one. Did anybody choose to do that one? And I'm curious about the connections between that one and the Israel is a racist endeavor point.
Reminds me of Trump.
It's really interesting because one of the things that they said when they were shutting down ethnic studies in Arizona is that Mexican American students learning about their own history was anti-American hatred.
And that's very much linked to one of the suspicious indicators under PVE, which is being too much into your culture, right? Yeah.
Did anybody choose to read the ethnic studies one? I'm really curious about your thoughts about that. Oh yeah, Michelle says, yeah, so there's a promote the overthrow of the US government is one of the things that can get your program shut down. Thanks, Michelle. The reason the ethnic studies tie-in is so interesting is because Simon Wiesenthal Center, the same organization that accepted PVE money to start doing preventing violent extremism programs. Oh, okay. Andrew, I want to hear about that in just a second. Let me just, the same organization, Simon Wiesenthal Center, that accepted the PVE money has just been tapped by the state of California to do anti-bias training for students instead of ethnic studies, or to coordinate it. And they're going to be doing the anti-Semitism units using the IHRA definition. So ethnic studies is a really big tie-in for that. Andrew, do you want me to read that out loud, or do you want to tell us about it? I can unmute you. Okay, 1 second.
Hey, so the Arizona case is kind of interesting in that it was being used as just political fodder by the right in Arizona by Tom Horn, who was the superintendent of the Arizona schools. And he was just using it as a launching pad for his own political campaign to run for larger statewide office. And he went on like CNN, for instance, and argued with Michael Eric Dyson, kind of a academic Black studies figure. And he kept saying things that really got Dyson tongue-tied, like saying the only, anti-racist thing is to not even talk about race, and kept quoting from Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech that says, being judged by the content of your character rather than the color of your skin. And then he said that he marched alongside Martin back in the day. And so it's this thing that actually became popular in the 90s with, what's his name? The ex-Grand Dragon with KKK. Shoot, I'm forgetting his name for a second. Who started saying that like whites' rights is actually the next thing that needs to happen, and that it's, the next move of the civil rights movement is for white people to be victims. And so I think that's really sort of taken on the character of what white racism looks like these days, is it claims to be working alongside other anti-racist efforts, and it has these really elliptical formulations of what rights protections are. So I predict we're just going to see more and more of this. I mean, Trump is a great version of someone who trains sort of like white victimhood. So I think everyone's totally right on here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's this fundamental similarity between this and that, where the IHRA definition and this one, where there's this sense of settlers flipping the script. So now they're defending against aggression from natives. I mean, you even see our military budget called our defense budget. Our it's this fortress mindset that so, and then in the IHRA definition, a Palestinian perspective that Israel is a racist endeavor casts Palestinians as the real racists according to the IHRA definition. And then Mexican Americans in Arizona, learning that that land used to be part of Mexico and was stolen, cast the Mexican American kids as the real racists in the eyes of the state. So it's really interesting. My question to all of you is this an inevitable part of using protected classes and hate crimes at all? Like, what do you think about hate crime legislation in general? And is it always going to be weaponized this way to protect the people the state wants to protect? In other words, can hate crimes be a real protection from white supremacy, or are they a tool of white supremacy?
I feel like if it's employed by the state, then it is a tool of white supremacy, right? Yeah, I mean, maybe those of us as individuals, right, us fighting it, not necessarily, but yeah, I mean, if it's my thing is if it's passed by the state, then it is going to have an undertone or an overtone or whatever you want to call it of white supremacy. But that's a good question. Yeah, like Jamie said. And then I also saw Dr. Chaudhry had also shared something in there, Akil, as well. Not to take away from the question, but.
Yeah, Dr. Chaudhry said definitely a tool of racial capitalism. And Jamie saying maybe it's reformist. I think that one of the things that we consistently see as a theme of, both policing in general and CVE, is it takes these systems that people are forced to rely on for some modicum of protection, or that they're shoved into people's throats as this is the way you are protected, even if it doesn't help them, such as the mandated reporting system, or such as hate crimes, Department of Children and Family Services, and then using that as a framework to launch more policing. And we see, for example, so Simon Wiesenthal Center is the organization I foreshadowed a little bit earlier, really maintains a list, it maintains not only a definition of anti-Semitism, but they try to be the ones that define hate. So I'm going to show you an example. I have an app on my phone that is their app, and it's called Combat Hate. And this lets you report an incident of hate according to what they consider to be hate. You could take a picture of it and report it. And what we're trying to research is, when this premiered, was the goal to fold this into referral networks and basically use it as a tool of surveillance. But regardless, this is another example of institutions that are extremely hateful, such as police or Zionist organizations. Oh, Ruby, it's called Combat Hate. I'm not sure if the exclamation mark is in the name. The app name doesn't have the exclamation mark. And them themselves being extremely hateful, them being also the arbiters of what is called hate. And I want to end really soon, because I know that we have the gang narrative thing as well to talk about in the last 15 minutes. But anybody have any questions and ongoing questions about this activity? And also keep in mind that you can keep that PDF and make your own copy and check out. There's also, Dr. Chaudhry is sharing a bunch of really great resources in the chat too. So anyway, anybody have any questions about that activity before we do the gang narrative conversation? You can raise your hand and we can unmute you too. So Ruby's sharing that there's a similar app called act.il that has gamified reporting Palestinian events as anti-Semitic. Absolutely, I'm pretty sure that app was even revealed to have direct funding from the Israeli government.
Yeah, if you look at it on the App Store, there's a really I guess we could look deeper into the organization that published it, but it does have Israel in the title. They are based in Israel, and that you basically, when you make an account, you get points for like clicking buttons that automate comments on Palestinian events, like hate comments, and you get points for reporting events, and that's how there was a Layla Khalid webinar that happened a few months ago, and that's how it got shut down on 4 different streaming services, was from that app. So this has become like a new tactic of a lot of Zionist institutions that we're seeing come up.
Wow. And Asfar just shared another resource online as well about the history in Britain of resistance and self-defense against far-right violence. Yeah, it's really interesting. Okay, so with that, one last thing before I pass it off to Hamid is just another reminder to send one of us your email if you would like to join for next Wednesday, the 16th at 4 p.m., our working meeting, where we'll be continuing to develop resources and building power. So send one of us your email if we don't already have it. And then Hamid, would it be possible for you, I think you have to do it because you're the host, can you save the chat as well so we get all these amazing links?
I can make you the host.
Oh, okay, let's go for it.
I don't know how to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
And then go for it with the gang narrative too.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, I think this conversation is so instructive and telling as to when we think about the gang identity and we look at gang definitions. This seems to be the trajectory that gang policing has taken, where now, particularly policing of young people, has now taken on more of a national security significance by using this language of extremism and radicalization. But if we think back and go back about 30 years and start looking at the definition of super predators, and even going back before that as well, I mean, this has always been in the making. And while the history of gangs and many of the folks are way more informed than myself, particularly folks at Youth Justice Coalition and some of the other folks, but just a quick overview that gangs have always been there. But I think the way the notion of gangs and the gathering of people started getting demonized was when most of the time non-white individuals coming together, particularly in the Black community and the Indigenous community, started creating this self-defense, started creating this self-defense against organized violence and organized white supremacist violence, especially by just in order to protect themselves from potential lynchings, and also a collective sort of almost an assault and mob assault on individuals. But we also need to maybe go back and look at that post-civil rights in the 1960s. What were some of the tools that were deployed to start the broad-based criminalization, which could lead to further suppression and abandonment, and the justification of creating the next layer of the other? We always talk about the othering of people, how they are demonized and criminalized, both culturally, politically, and economically, and socially as well. So we just kind of looking at this whole buildup of gang narrative and the creation of this identity and this broader demonization too. So we see that how the Richard Nixon's Southern strategy about just how to stoke both racism and racial violence during electoral politics. We see that how very methodically the introduction of the fear and the escalated and elevated fear of the other, particularly in this case the young Black men, if you will. So that's where we see the launching and the whole institutionalization with both the power of the state, financially, resource-wise, but also the legal mandate as well. That how we've seen gang policing with the war on gangs and the war on crime escalating in the 1960s and moving on. And we'd also during previous conversations at the coalition, we had talked about how the academy was deeply involved into sort of the creating this narrative as well. And we've seen before Dr. Edward Banfield's work around, just in a very coded language, but not that coded, being very direct about it, that police should feel free to come down hard on poor young men, and they should only be allowed to go to school for up to 9th grade, to train them for low value labor. So we see, not just evidence, but also the constant intellectualization of this framework as well, and then how, culturally speaking, how we see the police shows, then we see just how police is glamorized, and then who's on the receiving end. So in a sense, this whole process over time, at least over the last 60 years, we see this whole just development of how gang identity, how the targeting of young, particularly of youth in non-white communities, especially in the Black community, had happened. And then, just creating conditions on the ground that would lead to further marginalization and alienation of young people as well. And in this case, I would talk about the deportation of El Salvadorian young immigrants, who had come under, just to the U.S., the Cambodian youth who had come here, and that first you go and wreck their economies, first you go and wage wars, and then when people need to flee, need to protect themselves, then you reframe them as violent individuals. So we saw the development of MS-13, that happened with the youth from El Salvador and various other places as well. The development of Mexican gangs in Los Angeles in trying to again defend themselves. We remember the Zoot Suit riots, and we remember the assault on young Mexicans in Chinatown and other parts of Los Angeles and in the ports as well. So the history of gangs that, we need to really sort of step back and pause, that the demonization of individuals as gang members has taken on very many layers as well. And we saw that how gang injunctions were introduced, but that also resulting that when you go back to South Central Los Angeles and the crack cocaine proliferation and epidemic, that how very methodically the economies in South Central Los Angeles, the manufacturing economy, was completely plundered. It was completely just just dismantled through outsourcing. This used to be a vibrant working class communities who had homes, who had home ownerships as well. A majority of them Black. But we saw, and again, I would suggest that there's a whole lot of research on this piece as well. I'm just kind of running through, and maybe just to end here in about a minute. That when we talk about gangs, it is imperative that we really look at that. What were the conditions on the ground? I mean, the title that the coalition released before the bullet hit Sabadi is so apropos into explaining this thing, that before that gun comes out, what are the conditions on the ground? How contact is made, how somebody is criminalized, how culturally they're demonized as well, right? So in a sense, we see gang injunctions, gang databases. I mean, we talk about the Olympics, massive sweeps, where in one day over 1,500 youth in South Central Los Angeles were thrown into the system. And here we see today now that the intent to cause harm remains central. Never a day goes by that a scandal is not exposed, where the LAPD was now exposed to have intentionally been putting people into gang databases. And then the coalition's work during the dismantlement of predictive policing, that how they had developed this chronic offender program, which then put people in secret lists. Well, they'll be harassed and they will be constantly traced and tracked. So in a sense, here we are today speaking about countering violent extremism and preventing violent extremism, and never a day goes by that we don't find out or expose the whole fallacy of gang policing, the whole conspiracies around the continuing criminalization of young people. So I myself, on a personal level, look at preventing violent extremism and countering violent extremism and the stuff that we've been talking about with Simon Wiesenthal as parts of major conspiracies to constantly, on a cultural level, on a political level, on an economic level, to criminalize, to demonize, to create that other and create that picture of an enemy or a threat to the system, and then justifies all kinds of violence on not just the individuals, but their communities and their families as well.
Nice. Thank you for breaking that down for us. I know we didn't leave a whole lot of time, but it definitely, it really helps to hear some of those examples and some of that history. And so just wanted to really quickly share the screen. Celine, if you wanted to just share, sorry, let me.
Yeah.
Screen just to kind of how get involved in everything. And feel free, if you also have any questions on what Hamid was just talking about, feel free to put it in the chat. We can try and answer in the last few minutes as well. But here we go. Okay.
So we can go to the one right before that, the slide.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Yeah, so again, thank you all for joining tonight. We were, I know it was a lot of information. And again, so much appreciation to Asfar for joining us from the UK and talking to us about Prevent. And so I just wanted to share more about like what our campaign entails and just ways that folks can get involved. So we're during our monthly Fight Against the War on Youth campaign meetings, which are happening, this one right now, and then our next one is in January. We'll be just giving like general updates. Tonight we piloted some of the information and shared some of the resources that we've been working on. But I think that, for the next one, we'll also be sharing updates and having more public facing meetings about what folks want to know about. And I think something to reflect on also, if you all want to follow up with us, and we shared our emails in the chat. If you think about anything and you have like another question comes up, or if there's anything else that you are curious about that you didn't get a chance to ask about during this meeting, please feel free to follow up with us. And we're just really curious to hear what folks want to know and what your experiences have been if you've been if you've experienced, any kind of like relationship with any of these organizations or institutions that we talked about. We know during one of our previous workshops, we met educators who did have an experience with the Simon Wiesenthal Center and who wanted to get involved because they wanted to know more about it. So yeah, our monthly meetings, these ones with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition are more public facing, and they're happening every month, second Tuesday of the month. But you can also feel free to request workshops that are more specific for educators, for students, and for community members. So we can also give a much deeper look into CVE in schools, as well as the institutions that are playing a role in CVE in schools. We didn't cover all of them today. We didn't get to all of the information today, but feel free to request the full workshop from us. The other thing we're going to release hopefully next month is this Educators Pledge, building off of the pledge that we worked on with, or the statement that we worked on with the Teachers Union of Los Angeles in 2018, in which the UTLA released a statement about against countering violent extremism and preventing violent extremism in schools, kind of building off of that, having another statement that educators specifically can sign. And we're also working on research and a campaign statement and a couple of fact sheets about what CVE looks like in schools and what institutions are currently involved. And again, so you can go to the next slide. And our next, so we also, in between all of the monthly public meetings, we have working meetings. So if folks want to get involved in helping us build out this campaign and build out those resources and help us facilitate the workshops, you can join those working meetings. Our next one is happening on December 16th from 4 p.m. I think from 4 to 5 p.m. And again, you can email one of us to join. Our contacts are at the bottom of the slide here. And you can also fill out our campaign interest form. It's the Google form that I also shared in the chat. And it's here on the box, the middle box, number 2, on the slide has the link to the campaign interest form. So if that's something where you also want to, share with your networks, if you want to share with other educators, with other students who might be interested, please have them fill that out. Again, people are also free to reach out to us directly, but that might be an easier way to compile folks' emails and interests. And yeah, so yeah, you can join our monthly meetings, fill out our campaign interest form, request a workshop, join our email lists, and of course, follow us on social media to stay tuned. We'll probably be having a workshop sometime early next year, specifically on CVE in schools, a full deep dive and into all of the institutions that are complicit in that. And we'll let everyone know, like whoever sends us your emails, we'll add you to the email list and we can update you all on upcoming workshops. And I'll pass it off to Hamid. And again, if folks have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or follow up with us.
Hamid, you're on mute. Are you talking to all of us? You're on mute, actually.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I passed the host thing to Akhil and I couldn't unmute myself. So, so real quickly, folks, next Tuesday is the 3rd Tuesday of the month, and wanted to make a quick announcement that we will have an end of the year sort of conversation. We will be inviting our comrade, Dr. Bita Amani, to give us an update as to what the current conditions are around COVID and what sort of work is going on the front lines, and that's next Tuesday on the 15th. We will also be looking at folks who have been on the front lines around this reclaim land fight that has been going on in El Sereno about the properties owned by Caltran, and also folks from Black Lives Matter as to what that fight has been out in the front lines, and where are we at around the abolition of policing and defunding policing and that campaign as well. So look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Thank you, Akhil.
Yes, thank you all for joining. Feel free to reach out in between, and yeah, wishing you all a good evening and good health, and hopefully see you all next Tuesday. Good night, everybody.
Thank you all so much for joining.
Bye,
Yes,
everyone.
thank you. Bye.
I'm just gonna screenshot everybody's links because for some reason it's not letting me save the
You can't
chat.
save it? Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
let's stay to do
But
that.
there are so many resources that Asfar and Dr. Chaudhry shared with us.
I took a picture with my phone, but but then you have to kind of manually probably type it in. So
Yeah, I think we should capture all of these
Yeah.
amazing links.
all right, everyone. Well, good night.
Everybody feel free. I'm just gonna go through it and screenshot it. So I don't think I'll just end it as soon as I'm done. Sorry.
Cool.
And again, drop your emails. If y'all want to follow up, drop your emails in the chat. We'll follow up. Jamie, that's awesome. How do you do that?
I think I got all of the links.
Wait, do y'all see Jamie?
Oh, that's cool.
Glasses?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Nice.
Bye,
Jamie.
y'all.
Bye, Jamie.
Night.
Highlight of the night.
Bye, everyone.